Hello and welcome to the Gaming Dadcast with a whole new setup here, trying something new. Uploading to YouTube, what is wrong with me? So I'm uploading to audio platforms and video platforms, so if you're joining on audio, welcome, here's your virtual wave, and if you're joining on YouTube, well, there you go. Today we're going to be talking about Assassin's Creed, A Pirate Tale of Connection. And we're going to be talking about stories and games. So, let's get to it. In the distant past of 2013, I was working in a warehouse. Well, I was both in the warehouse and inside within the office. I had the benefit of being active throughout the day while still having the option to go inside and get work done too. Our work crew was very memorable, but there were two guys in particular that fit into my story today. Let's call them Jeff and Brad. These two gentlemen were vastly different than me in just about every way. Brad was balding and frankly a completely different personality type than mine, while Jeff was tall, skinny, laid back, and into very different interests than my own. I got along with Jeff pretty well, but not so much with Brad. Again, his personality just didn't jive with mine, and we didn't agree on, well, most things. Basically, every interest we had was the polar opposite of what I was into. He made ridiculous videos, which initially caught my interest, then I realized they were not my cup of tea. He listened to music I didn't care much for. He wasn't interested in art, to my knowledge, didn't care about video games, and would often heckle or joke around in a very condescending way. To be fair, I don't think he realized how condescending it was when he spoke, but it still was. Anyway, the point I want to make here is that these two and myself, though work colleagues who treated each other with respect, weren't the best of friends, largely due to such differences in interests. But in the fabled year of 2013, a simple video game managed to bring the three of us together. This is that story. Assassin's Creed, A Pirate Tale of Connection. So, pirates, right? I have no idea why I like pirates so much. They pillaged, they plundered, they were generally not good people. But there's something alluring about the freedom, I suppose. Drifting from place to place, living each day without thinking about the next. What I never realized back in 2013 was that a good video game about pirates could make them even cooler. Sure, there were other pirate games that had been released, but they just didn't have the it factor for me. Then came Assassin's Creed 4, Black Flag. By the time I discovered the game was releasing soon, I had given up on the Assassin's Creed franchise. I thought the first game was very mediocre. I absolutely loved the second game. The third game had an ending so bad in my eyes that it just completely turned everything off for me with this. It ruined everything for me. So I gave up on the series. But of course, the developers took one of my favorite aspects of Assassin's Creed 3, the sailing, and fully expanded it into a game and added pirates. The draw was too great for me to resist, and I ended up picking up the game darn close to launch. Meanwhile, my work situation was fine. Nothing bad, nothing great. It just kind of was moving along. When I was out in the warehouse, I was managing inventory, fulfilling pickups, or chucking around water heaters. I worked, I got paid, and I chatted with a couple co-workers that I really enjoyed being around. There was the consistently cranky older lady who had been with the company the longest. She was a big softie underneath that gruff exterior. We were typically the first ones into the office each day, so I really enjoyed chatting with her a little bit while I got my day set up. She would complain about something, I'd listen, then we'd crack jokes and get ourselves into a lighter mood. There was the company mom, who always took interest in others and made sure everyone else was okay. I still keep in contact with her because she's just wonderful. Then there was Jeff. We enjoyed each other's company, but I wouldn't say we had a lot in common. He was really into guns, going to football games, even if he had to do work-related stuff in the parking lot before going in to enjoy the game, and he loved older, cheesy comedy films. Okay, that last thing I enjoy too. He was a cool guy, and always played music in his office that I enjoyed. We shared common work complaints, and this was part of the reason why we had become work buddies. Whenever we would be having a rough day, getting yelled at by people about their water heaters, and he would crank up songs like Higher Love, and we would find our zen to get through. But outside of work, Jeff and I could hang out, but we weren't the closest of friends by any standard. In fact, many times it would feel a little awkward. As I'm sure you've gathered about me, if you caught me in my streams, videos, or past podcasts, and you'll learn soon enough, I'm a talker. If it wasn't for this wonderful gift/curse, the time outside of work with Jeff would have most likely been unbearable. As for Brad, he was all of our boss, but in the weird hello fellow students kind of way, if you catch my reference. Honestly, I didn't agree or care much for the way he ran things, and I'm willing to bet most others didn't, but he was overall an alright guy. Most of the time, I simply avoided it. That way I wouldn't get cranky with some new process or rules he recently set. He was also very opinionated in a way that couldn't be swayed, thus making it even more difficult to relate to or even talk to him in a casual way. Luckily, he would usually be found in his office doing things, so it was easy to avoid him most of the time. Though having a desk that sat directly in his line of sight didn't help. I'm not quite sure what he did in that office, but he appeared busy and cranky most of the time. Anyway, that was about it. Work, a little chat, then home to hang out with my wife. And then I'd play games. But one day, something odd happened. It was a couple weeks after I had gotten Black Flag and was so deep into the game, it was all that I played. People at work knew I was very into gaming, but I didn't talk too much about it. The point being that nobody really knew how into Black Flag I was. Then one day, as I wandered into the office, from the warehouse, taking a quick break, Brad called out to me from his office. "Hey, you ever play Assassin's Creed games?" I figured Brad was about to give me a hard time about, being an adult, he still played video games. But the look on his face was something I did not expect. Genuine interest in my answer. "Yeah, I have. I'm currently playing a new one about pirates." As soon as I finished my sentence, Brad excitedly jumped in. "Oh man, isn't it cool? I've been so into doing all the side stuff. I stopped doing the main story stuff. How much of the map have you unlocked?" I was so taken aback, it took me a few seconds to respond. We then proceeded to chat about the game for the next 10 minutes, taking up my entire break time. We talked about Edward Kenway, the protagonist, and how we enjoyed his storyline thus far. While discussing Black Flag with Brad, Jeff walked by and overheard our conversation. Almost as fast as Brad responding to the sudden revelation that I played the same game, Jeff hopped into the conversation joyfully. "Wait, you guys talking about Black Flag? Dude, that game is so freaking cool." After the workday was done and I headed home to hang out with my wife, it all started to really set in. That was one of the most enjoyable days I had at work. Work itself was the same, but it was such a neat experience. Here were three guys who would not have really hung out or spoken casually to each other on any normal day, but thankfully it hadn't been normal. all thanks to a video game. That common ground, albeit a type of entertainment that isn't incredibly important in the grand scheme of things, was what we needed to be able to speak with each other in a relaxed, comfortable way. The next day, at various times, we would continue to speak about the game and share our common interest. One day, we spoke about the wonderful color usage in the game, how the water looked so cool for a game, the intoxicating sea shanties while sailing around the map, and how the team who created the game did a much better job balancing the real world storyline and the pirate world. Another day, we even shared some of the same dislikes with the game, like the samey side missions, objectives, and repetitive tasks like taking down forts, common open world stuff nowadays. This went on for weeks, and honestly, it changed our relationship within the workplace and outside of it. Sure, neither of these guys would ever become close friends, but they were definitely more than just work buddies or acquaintances thanks to this pirate game. We enjoyed discussing the new islands and treasures we would find, the ocean life we were able to hunt successfully, and getting obsessed with the ship trade management system. We all loved this game, and that common ground helped our interactions with each other flourish in such a weird, wonderful way. After some time, Jeff was first to announce he had completed all of the side stuff. Completed the map, was about to finish the main storyline to wrap it all up. I was next, and Brad came after me. Once we had all finished the main story, we all agreed we enjoyed the ending and the twist at the very end. Don't worry, there are no spoilers here. I remember Brad saying one day, a game has got to be special if we all played it and liked it enough to 100% complete it. I nodded in agreement, and we continued on with our discussion. Then one day we slowed down our talks regarding the game. It had run its course, and we were all moving on to different games. I thought to myself, well, we'll go back to the way it was before. But much to my surprise, it didn't. We would talk about other things we found common ground in. We all liked riding quads and off-road vehicles. We would discuss other games. Heck, Brad even lent me his PS3 on 2 separate occasions so I could play Uncharted 1 and The Last of Us. And let me tell ya, that was a honking piece of expensive hardware, so Brad had some trust in me to lend it to me. This experience was the first time it really hit home how games can make a difference in ways I could have never imagined. This would continue on throughout my life and still rings true to this day. Now, I love chatting about Hades, older Borderlands games, and so many other titles with my 2 close friends. I have common ground with my sons, who both enjoy games. Even though my sons play games that I may not care about, nor ever really play, I can understand their enthusiasm in a way that I didn't have growing up. My dad wasn't interested in gaming. Most people I interacted with at school and out in public looked down on gaming. And until my experience with my coworkers, I didn't really have any gaming connection there. Now, I have so many connections through games. It's wonderful. So yeah, gaming isn't the most important thing, but it is so cool to see how it can become a common ground for so many different people and in so many different areas, even in the workplace. Before we get to the next topic, you may have noticed a couple of co-hosts here. My puppies, they're just joining, so I hope they're not distracting, and if they are, well, they say sorry, I guess. Anyway, topic time. It's been pretty awesome watching games grow into mainstream entertainment. When I was young, my mom got an NES, and even as a kid, I could tell it was a niche thing. Sure, I didn't understand that word, but the concept was clear to me. as the years went by, video games kept growing in popularity, and my initially obscure passion for playing games became commonplace. With this growth, games evolved in visuals, music and audio implementation, and more story driven. I remember playing Zelda A Link to the Past, and the way the story unfolded blew my mind. Heck, the fact that an actual story was even part of a game was such a crazy concept. Then I'd say around the Xbox 360 slash PS3 era, games started to get very story heavy, and honestly, I was all about it. They were like interactive movies, and I loved it. Uncharted, Modern Warfare 1 and 2, Gears of War, Dead Space. So many games would release that were story driven, and I wanted them all. However, as time went on, something just started to change in my gaming tastes. I didn't gravitate as much to the typical story driven games I had previously been so fond of. I still enjoyed games with good stories, but I just didn't like the big budget ones. Now, in the past 5 years or so, I have begun to realize I started preferring other games. And to note, I absolutely love JRPGs nowadays, which have an in-depth and typically wacky storyline. Story-driven games are honestly the worst at telling stories. When reading a book, watching a film, enjoying a TV show, or some other type of medium that tells a story, there's only one way it can unfold. Sure, we as the ones taking in the story can have expectations or theories on what might happen, but it is ultimately on a single path. In games, though, there's another aspect that can impact how a story is told. Gameplay. A video game has to have some kind of gameplay, right? When they don't, they're just a long film or a show. That's the draw of video games. The player takes part in how things turn out, and it tests and sometimes improves the skills of a player. Look at From Software games like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring. They have become mainstream, though they don't have traditional storytelling aspects. Sure, they tell stories through environments and light story-driven cutscenes, but a lot of the story in these games are lore and must be found or deduced. Yet, players around the world flock to these games. With the release of Elden Ring, I had friends buy and play it who had never played a From Software game before. These types of games excel because it's focused on gameplay and exploration, not an intense emphasis on story. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this rule. For one example, you have games that are very light on the gameplay aspect, but still require the player to be attentive and interactive. Some examples are Doki Doki Literature Club and Triangle Strategy. Yes, there are gameplay mechanics, but they are either very separated from the story, so they don't interfere, so kind of like Triangle Strategy, or they take a back seat to the story. The other type I've found to be satisfying are those games that blend gameplay into the story, not the other way around. Good examples of these games are God of War 2018, God of War Ragnarok, and Disco Elysium. The former games are very linear and driven by story, but there are moments of gameplay openness and utilizes various mechanics, for better or worse, that accent the story being told. These are games that infuse the gameplay into the story. So for Disco Elysium, your choices matter and change the game. For the God of War games, that's a single path that you're part of. Speaking of linear games, they are easily the best storytelling games. However, even these types of games have pitfalls. For example, take one of my all-time favorite games, The Last of Us. This game hit me hard when I played it years ago for the first time while borrowing my work colleague's PS3, as I mentioned. Every time I've played it since, it still gets to me. The brilliance in the ending sequence and the final scene are outstanding to me. If anything hasn't aged well, it's the gameplay, and honestly, that's where the game falls. This is the pitfall of games like this. The story is the main event, while the gameplay feels almost tacked on to call it a game. Some moments really work, though. Without spoiling, the ending run sequence has me on the edge of my seat every time I play The Last of Us. However, other parts detract from the story and pull the story out of the moment, like getting instantly killed by an enemy in the game named a clicker. These moments of failure lead to a total disruption of connection between the player and the story being told. Oh man, this is really intense, but wait! I just died. Well, just try again, I guess. Going the other direction with this conundrum is equally bad. The game becomes, well, not a game. It turns into something where I just wished it was a film or a show. Finding this balance is tough, even for linear games. To emphasize this a bit more, I want to bring up a very specific game and a very specific instance. In Resident Evil 4, there is a section utilizing what are called QuickTime events. This section absolutely sucked, and it comes closer to the end of the game in a tense story-driven moment. I can't tell you how frustrated I had become due to constantly failing and having to repeat the same story section again and again. This completely destroyed my immersion at the time and reminded me that, yes, I'm very much playing a video game that has a story and not a game that tells a story. This type of pitfall has many faces and facets and varying degrees of length and frustration. But they all do one thing very effectively. They pull you out of the story and make you remember that you're playing a game. And they kill the pacing. Not only does dying or getting the equivalent of a game over screen pull you out of an enthralling story, but there's this term I learned when I started playing through the original Uncharted trilogy. Ludonarrative dissonance. Fun fact, I recently replayed Uncharted 4 and the far superior Lost Legacy, and UC4 is the reason I decided to discuss this topic today. So, to give a brief summary of the games, you play as Nathan Drake, an adventurous treasure hunter who often finds himself in sticky situations. I imagine the idea here is a character in stories told like Indiana Jones. However, when Jones was usually fighting bad guys and not going on killing sprees, more often than not he and his crew were comedically trying to escape, Nathan Drake murders hundreds of people. Now look, these people typically are actual bad guys. Okay, what's interesting here is that Drake and his team are clearly portrayed as the good guys in the story, but they kill so many people. There's that gameplay issue right there. And all in the name of getting treasure. That's kind of like a pirate, right? Anyway, there is a very clear divide here between what we, the player, experience in gameplay and the storyline the writers are trying to tell. This is ludonarrative dissonance. Another fun fact, I believe there's a trophy in UC4 that is named after this. In some games, the gameplay actually plays into the story and characters. See God of War 2018 and Ragnarok, and now it fully acknowledges Kratos' past violent endeavors and how he is somewhat trying to move past them. But most of the time, it just doesn't work well from a story perspective. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed my recent replay of Uncharted 4 okay, and actually still really enjoyed Lost Legacy. But they just didn't hit the same once I was past the incredibly crafted set pieces and having revisited them years later to see how they've aged. Spoilers, they didn't age very well in my opinion. For a final point to my hot take, I'll make it short and sweet. Games are already expensive enough without adding a full writing team to craft an expert story within an interactive medium. Games take forever to make and are expensive. So if you're going to be spending a ton of money, why not make a film or show instead? Video games are great, and some games are freaking wonderful at telling stories. Just to name a few, the Mass Effect trilogy, Dead Space 1 and 2, and the aforementioned games I spoke nicely about today, and even some of them that I had some gripes with. And I still enjoy story driven games. But if I'm being honest with myself, and after playing games for over 30 years, geez, I'm old, while recognizing the evolution of TV and film over the years, I think games are often terrible at telling stories. Well, that's it. So, this is the new format that I'm trying to get into here. We'll see if it works. We'll see if it doesn't work. I have no idea. I know I have 9 episodes planned here. And after that, I got another idea, and I don't know how that's going to play out, but we'll see. I'm hoping it's going to be really fun. But yeah, so this is what it is. I appreciate you guys watching, listening, whatever it may be. I really do appreciate it. It boggles my mind every time that anybody listens to me talk at all. And tell me, like if you're listening on audio platforms, I think you can comment and do different things there, or find me on Twitter, Instagram. Not on Twitter much these days. You can find me on Twitch streaming Mondays and Tuesdays. But leave a comment. Let me know. What's a game that has stuck with you and maybe helped you make bonds with other people that you normally wouldn't have? And what do you think about video games as story, telling stories, as story machines? What do you think about that? Am I wrong? Am I just crazy here? Anyway, I appreciate you, and until next time, see ya!